Hello and welcome to yet another installment on the BGCSE History. In this installment, the discussions shall solely focus on the Portuguese colonization of Angola. Our discussions shall be guided by the specific syllabus objectives of the BGCSE History. It is important that we are directed by the objectives because it is from these objectives where questions at both the school level and the national level are crafted. So primarily, we seek here to make your life easier as a learner or even as a facilitator who has issues, who has difficulties in interpreting the specific syllabus objectives. I must hint out from the onset that even though the topic is the Portuguese colonization of Angola, we must understand that we are not talking about the modern day Republic of Angola, but rather we are talking about Angola prior to the colonial era, prior to the colonial period. And I must also emphasize, because that was the first point of call, if you wish, in relation to the Portuguese colonization of that region of the African continent. One of the things that must interest us really is the location of the Congo Kingdom prior to his contact, I beg your pardon, with the Portuguese. It is important that you at least have a mental picture of where that particular area is or was at the time. A quick search on the internet will, reveal multiple maps which, pinpoint the location of these once, famous and extremely powerful kingdom. So from the onset, I want us to, grapple with the subject matter of the relations between the Portuguese and the Bakongo during during the early days of contact. It is important that we appreciate also, what the Congo Kingdom was like, before it got into contact with the Portuguese. Now, this part is not for examination purposes. That is the part which deals with what the Congo Kingdom was like, or even how it came into existence. But as a history student, as a history facilitator, you must be in a position to provide this historical, kind of background if you wish. Who are we talking about? We should know the folks who constituted the Congo Kingdom. Now, what is clear, what is not in doubt here is that the Congo Kingdom was established. It was established around, we are told, the 15th century, to be more precise, around the year 1400. And the people who were instrumental in its conception and its establishment, the people who birthed the kingdom, as it were, we are told were immigrants who were coming from the chiefdom of the Mbungu, which was slightly northwards from where the kingdom was later to be established. So immigrants, folks coming from outside, found people in that particular region, subdued them, and became the ultimate authority. Now, the Congo Kingdom, in terms of its composition, primarily was made up of, it was constituted by the Mbundu and the Mbwela ethnic groups. These are quite difficult names. So the Mbundu and the Mbwela were the main groups in the kingdom, but obviously there were other groups. Now, the immigrants, the Mbundu and the Mbwela, were led by a man by the name of Wene, W-E-N-E. Now, Wene was the leader, and he was at the forefront of the conquest of the people that he found in the region. These are people that later on he brought into his kingdom, and their numbers strengthened the kingdom politically and even militarily. Now, when we are told conquered the area and occupied what could have then been the capital of that particular, of the people that he found there, and the place was called Mbanza. And Wene was a very smart fella. He made alliances. He got into alliances with the multiple groups that he found there. And the alliances were predominantly around, these were marriage kind of alliances. So he married across, ethnic lines. He got wives from the different groups that he subdued, from the different groups that he got into contact with. And obviously, this would, to the greatest extent possible, cement ties between Werne and the people he found in the area. So they became relatives by virtue of the intermarriages, the marriages across ethnic lines. And Werne was instrumental. He led by example, as it were. So it cemented ties between, the immigrants, the conquerors, and the conquered. Now, in the course of time, we see Werne becoming, or he became, the ultimate authority. He became some kind of a supreme leader, of all the people that were in the vicinity, of all the people that he conquered. And as the supreme leader, he acquired a new title, much in the mold of what we have on the African continent, or even in Botswana here, where you have people who characterized as Khosikgolo, such a title. So it denotes a lot of authority. It suggests, it indicates basically that these folks have a lot of authority. So when upon assuming this powerful position, was given a new kind of a title, an official title of some sort. So he was referred to now as the Manikongo or Ne Congo. And mind you, this Congo is spelled with the letter K, not C, Kongo. So when it became the Manikongo or Ne Congo. So in our case, we refer to those who are in political leadership, traditional political leadership, I must add, as Khosi, Khosi X, Khosi Y. So when it became Manikongo Wene or Nekongo Wene. So in most instances, basically, he was not referred to by his birth names, but basically, people were comfortable, and probably I suppose he was amenable to being just referred to as Nekongo or Manikongo. Now, the Congo Kingdom, prior to his contact with the Portuguese, was very powerful. This is a point that I want us to emphasize. Now, its power was measured not only in terms of its military strength, but also its economy. It had a thriving economy, which comprised, which was made up of different economic activities. It could be arable farming, it could be pastoral farming, you name it. Now, the literature here indicates that maybe before we talk about the economy, we must also emphasize this point because I made mention of it, that it was a kingdom that was built on conquest, military conquest. Which groups do we have examples of groups which were conquered by Wene? Some of the examples of the groups which were conquered were the Mpemba, the Nsundi, the Mbambo, the Soyo, the Mpangu, and the Mbata. These were chiefdoms which he subdued, and they became an essential, part of his, powerful, kingdom. So if you look at it, multiple chiefdoms were conquered, and these chiefdoms were put together to form a powerful kingdom, which was the Congo Kingdom. And if you look at the examples, it says, you know, multiple chiefdoms. So which means in terms of its geographic size, geographic expanse, the Congo Kingdom was extremely large because of the number of chiefdoms in the area which were, captured. And even the, the Ndongo chiefdom, was part of the Congo state, was part of the Congo kingdom. Now, Ndongo later, was able to wrestle its independence away from the Congo kingdom, and it existed as an independent entity. Well, today Ndongo is what we refer to as Angola. So that is a subject matter for a different, kind of a session. Now, we said the Congo kingdom was crafted through the use of military force. But even though that was the case, the rulers of the conquered, chiefdoms were given some degree of independence. There are certain areas where they could exercise their authority without necessarily having to ask for permission from the Manikongo. So they had some political and administrative authority over their subject people. So to some extent, we are saying the Congo Kingdom was a confederacy because its constituents, these chiefdoms, had some degree of independence. That's an important point to take note of. As an example, the rulers of these chiefdoms were given the authority to collect tribute, from the people that they led, from their subjects. And, they had an obligation, a responsibility to pay tribute to the Manikongo. And the Manikongo would be paid tribute in the form of slaves, as an example, ivory, hides, and mbanzu, which were special sea shells. I know I have said slaves were used to pay tribute. So clearly, you might be saying, then slavery was not introduced by the Portuguese in the Congo Kingdom. Well, perhaps we must add the form of slavery that we are talking about had a human face. People were given to the Manikongo. Obviously, they would lose some of their freedoms, but they were not treated as mere chattels like it was the case with Portuguese colonialism. So they had some modicum of respect that they were accorded as people. So they became servants. I think servitude would characterize it, far much better. So instead of them being slaves, we must say these were servants because they had some degree of, not authority, but they had certain freedoms that they could, enjoy. So they were not treated like, animals or beasts of burden, as it was the case during the colonial, era. Now, the tribute that Wene acquired from the multiple chiefdoms which made up his Congo kingdom was instrumental in boosting his personal wealth. And if he becomes an extremely wealthy, king, obviously people are going to be drawn to him. And the many people he had in his kingdom, the more power that he had. So this is the situation the Congo Kingdom actually found itself in, or it was in prior to its contact with the Portuguese. So we mentioned that the Congo Kingdom was strong economically, it was stable economically before its contact with the Portuguese. So this must be noted because later onwards, when we evaluate Portuguese or the impact of Portuguese colonization of the Congo Kingdom, we must try to draw linkages between the strength of the Congo Kingdom prior to contact and what it became once it was subdued by the Portuguese. It's an important, point that we must take note of. So we talked about, just in passing, the different economic activities that the people of the Congo practiced, that they ventured into. And at an economic level, you are dealing with activities that people engage in, for their survival, for their sustenance. You are talking about activities which would enable them to be able to carry out activities which would put food on the table, as it were, for them to become arable farmers who are very effective. They need to have the right tools with which to work. So if you look at the examples of the economic activities they practiced, it is not surprising that you have an activity such as metalworking. So basically, we are saying one of the economic activities the Bakongo practiced was metal work, metal workers. That is what they were. So they mined and smelted iron and copper. Obviously, the copper would be used to produce ornaments, earrings, bracelets, necklaces, you name it. The iron was predominantly used to produce agricultural implements or tools, your iron hoe, your iron axe, your iron knife, etc., etc. And these are tools which made it, possible for the Bakongo to engage in arable farming. Another example here would be that the Bakongo were expert hunters. They hunted a variety of animals. Some of them would be elephants, of course, because ivory was an important item of trade in later years. And then they were also skilled arable farmers, skilled pastoral farmers. As arable farmers, they would grow a variety of crops. As pastoralists, they would rear a variety of domesticated animals. You have pigs, fowls, sheep, cattle, among others. And talking about crops they grew, the examples here would include millet and sorghum. So those were the standout, crops. You cannot rule out watermelons. You cannot rule out pumpkins. Now, arable farming was very important, or agriculture in its entirety was very important to the people. Like I said earlier, this was the anchor of their existence. Through agriculture, they were able to access, food consistently, as long as the weather allowed them to do so. So agriculture, which is inclusive of arable farming and pastoral farming, was a reliable source of food. So that was the Congo Kingdom prior to its contact with the Portuguese. Now let's venture into that which probably would interest you the most as a student of history who is just about to sit for an examination or even a test. The nature of early Portuguese contact with the Congo Kingdom. What kind of relationship did the two groups have? We must be able to describe that relationship. Early relations, or the nature of early Portuguese contact with the Congo Kingdom. There's just one key thing to note about the early contact. It was peaceful. It was cordial. It was friendly. So these are synonyms which describe the relationship that the Portuguese and the Bakongo had during the early days of contact. Now, you must then provide specific examples. In other words, put it into context. If the relationship was cordial, it was friendly. If the contact was, cordial, it was friendly. Where is evidence to that effect? Well, we would say the relationship was cordial, it was friendly because one, the Portuguese built schools in the Congo Kingdom. One famous school was built, I think it was a technical school that was built in Mbanza, the capital. So the school was very, very important because it was a source of literacy. That is where they got educated. They were taught how to read and write. So they became literate. So the schools were very important to the Bakongo because, you know, these were centers of learning, and this is how they got to acquire literacy skills, reading and writing. You might question the quality of instruction, the quality of education that they got. But the fact of the matter is, schools were built, and Bakongo accessed Western education through the schools. It's a sign of friendly relations. Second example, churches were built in the Congo Kingdom by the Portuguese. So once they had built these churches, obviously you had to have teachers in there, and these teachers were missionaries who were to teach the Bakongo about the philosophy of the Roman Catholic Church, Roman Catholicism. So the Bakongo were to be converted to Christianity. So you had to have churches and you had to have missionaries to carry out the activity. And then there's the issue about diplomatic ties between the two groups. So the Portuguese set up an embassy in the capital of the Congo Kingdom, Mbanza. So if you have an embassy there, you would send, officials to man it. So primarily, the purpose of the embassy was to facilitate trade relations between the two, kingdoms: Portugal as a kingdom and the Congo Kingdom as a standalone, kingdom. So to smoothen relations, you had to have, ambassadors. Later onwards, we see during this early period, the Bakongo doing the same. They also sent out ambassadors to Lisbon, the capital of the Congo Kingdom. Finally, another example that is of the nature of relations between the two, groups, or between the two kings, if you wish, the king of the Congo Kingdom and the king of, the Portuguese Kingdom, is that they send agricultural experts to the Congo Kingdom. That is, the Portuguese sent agricultural experts to the Congo Kingdom. Now, if you send experts, you are saying, we want you to use your expertise to develop, our agriculture, to make it more effective. We want to acquire new knowledge, maybe technologies. Now, this is despite the fact that the Bakongo were skilled, arable and pastoral farmers. So there you are, agricultural experts, primarily to maybe help the Bakongo modernize their agricultural, activities. So that is the nature of the relationship. So what is important is just for you to say it was peaceful, and then you give examples. You do not necessarily have to explain, the benefits that they would accrue. That is, the Bakongo will get out of, having, missionaries in their midst. But it is important later onwards because you'd be asked to explain how Portuguese colonization could have, or to evaluate, Portuguese colonialism. Was that a good thing or even a bad thing? Right. So that is that with regards to the nature of the early contact. The next thing that we're going to venture into is concerned with what happened later onwards. Now, remember, the Congo Kingdom and the Portuguese Kingdom were brotherly kind of, kingdoms. The king of the Congo Kingdom and the Manikongo considered themselves to be brothers. But relations were to change later onwards because the Portuguese realized that there was a lot of value in having a firm control over the Congo Kingdom. So they wanted to colonize it, because if it becomes their colony, they call the shots. If it becomes a colony, it is basically, a personal possession of the Portuguese. They could do whatever it is that they wanted. So the wealth of the Congo Kingdom therefore motivated not the Bakongo, but the Portuguese to move towards colonizing the Congo Kingdom. And they took several steps, in an endeavor, in an attempt to achieve this objective of colonizing the Congo Kingdom. Sorry, for the purposes of this discussion, I think I will talk you through maybe two or so, examples, the steps that the Portuguese took to try to achieve the objective of colonizing the Congo Kingdom. Now, we talked about ambassadors earlier who were sent by the Portuguese to the Congo Kingdom. So one of the things that the Portuguese, tried to do, which could enable them to colonize the Congo Kingdom, was to use diplomacy, which can, in simple terms, be discussed or described rather, or defined as the art of negotiation. That's what diplomacy is about. So they sent their diplomats to the Congo Kingdom to sweet talk, the Bakongo into accepting Portuguese colonization, into becoming the subjects of the Portuguese. Now, through these diplomatic ties with the Congo Kingdom, the Portuguese, like I said, were attempting to bring the Congo under their spell, under their control. Remember, they had realized the value of the Congo Kingdom, what it could offer. So now, if the Congo Kingdom is their colony, it is under their control, then it becomes easier. It is no longer a killing task. You don't have to negotiate trade terms with anybody because it is your personal property. What do? You grab whatever it is that draws your attention, whatever it is that you're interested in. So if the Portuguese were to succeed in colonizing the Congo Kingdom, then they would have unlimited, unrestricted access to the natural wealth of the Congo Kingdom. Could be its people, it could be land, it could be, minerals, among other things. So these are, the resources that the Portuguese were hoping to have access to have control over. So colonialism would enable them to have unlimited access to the resources that the Congo Kingdom offered. Christianity was yet another method which was used by the Portuguese to colonize the Congo Kingdom. And what they did was to, first and foremost, target the Manikongo himself, convert him to Christianity. When you are done with that task, you shift your attention to the aristocrats, the elite of the Congo Kingdom, members of the royal family, and those who were very close to members of the royal family. They were to be converted to Christianity. And once that was achieved, it becomes very easy for you now to convert, the subject people, because basically what they will do is to follow in the footsteps of their leaders, in the footsteps of the Manikongo. Now, if the Portuguese were to succeed in colonizing the Congo Kingdom through the use of Christianity, they had to send missionaries there. And that explains why earlier they had to build churches. Now, how does Christianity get to facilitate colonialism? It was intended to soften them, to prepare them psychologically to what was coming. So the teachings of the Christian faith, or Roman Catholicism as it were to prepare the Bakongo psychologically for Portuguese colonialism. That their suffering, for example, if they were to be enslaved, if they were to be pushed out of their land, would be temporary. Because after they die, they would get to eventually rise from the dead and go to heaven, where they will enjoy milk and honey. So psychologically, they were softened up. They were prepared for colonialism or for colonization, not to resist Portuguese colonialism, not to question the abuse they were to suffer at the hands of their colonizers. So psychologically, they were to be prepared. And once that uh, was done, the task of colonizing the Congo Kingdom would not be difficult. At least those were the views of the Portuguese, um, intruders, if you would want to call them that. So Christianity would facilitate the colonization, process. Christianity, therefore, was an agent of colonialism. It speeded up the process of colonization in as far as the colonization of the Congo Kingdom was concerned. And what is quite interesting here is, the Christianized Bagongo, people assumed, Christian names. You can call them Portuguese names. So clearly, they would have to abandon the African names. They would have to abandon their traditional Congolese religious practices and beliefs. So that is the reality of what um, Portuguese colonialism, in far as Christianity was concerned, brought to the Bagong. I said reality, if you ask me. Um, Here's an interesting quote. I want to associate it to the use of Christianity as an instrument or as a tool for colonization. A certain Tim Wise, and I want to quote him verbatim, he says, "Here is the reality. The image of a white Jesus Christ has been used to justify enslavement, conquest, colonialism, underline that, the genocide of indigenous people. There are literally millions of human beings whose lives have been snuffed out by people who conquered them under the banner of a white god. So, if they were to be colonized, you need to Christianize them because Christianity would prepare them psychologically for what was coming." The third example is the use of the infamous policy of divide and rule. And this was particularly the case, or in fact, in the case of the Congo Kingdom, divide and rule would yield dividends, immediate results, probably, because there were frictions between those who had Christianized and those who had maintained their traditionalist practices. Christians and non-Christians, were not singing from the same hymn book. They could not present a united force against Portuguese colonialism because of their religious differences. So some Bakongo converted to Christianity, like I said, but others said no. They chose to maintain their traditional, practices and beliefs. Now, after the death of Nzinga Ku the Manikongo, Ku in 1506, what the Portuguese did was to support a faction which was competing. A group of members of the royal family had a favorite of their own to assume the throne after the death of Nzingaku. Now, there was Afonso, who was a Christian, and Mbanzu Akitima, his cousin, who was a traditionalist. These are two people who were vying for the position of rulership. So there were factions, like I said. The Portuguese naturally would side with Afonso because he was a Christian, and they supported him militarily to defeat his, cousin Mbanzu Akitima. So in 1506, we see Afonso succeeding his father and becoming Afonso the first of the Congo Kingdom. He became the next king, basically, and he was supported by the Portuguese. So the people were fighting amongst themselves. So the divide and rule tactic was easier because the Portuguese had actually prepared a segment of the population for colonialism. So it was in their interest for Afonso to win the contest, because if he becomes the next king, probably he would be amenable to Portuguese presence in his kingdom. Now, why is it important for us to take it a step further? We must emphasize that because the kingdom was disunited, it was very difficult. It became very difficult for it to oppose Portuguese colonialism. Their disunity, their disagreements actually blinded the factions to, that they could not see that their common enemy were the Portuguese. Keith and kin basically were fighting against each other, and that facilitated Portuguese colonialism. It made it very easy for the Portuguese to colonize the Congo Kingdom. The people were not united, so they could not resist Portuguese colonialism as a united force. They were blind to the fact that their enemy, their common enemy, were the Portuguese, not kith and kin, as it were. But that is the sad reality. Um, the Portuguese also used the conquest method. Now, remember, in your discussions about the methods which were used by Europeans to colonize Southern Africa in the 1830s, before 1835, you must have discussed the conquest method, which basically says military force was used to subdue the Portuguese in this particular instance. So the Portuguese, in other words, were superior militarily. They had modern guns compared to, should we say, rudimentary weapons, the spears, the knob carries, the axes, which the Portuguese would use, and even javelins, which the Jaga would use as weapons of choice. So they were no match for the superior, or modern weapons the Portuguese had at their disposal. So it becomes easier for them to subdue the Bakongo because they were militarily superior. So they conquered them. Conquest, in other words, was used as a method. It's one of the steps they took to achieve the objective of colonizing the Congo Kingdom. So if you look at these four examples we've been discussing in terms of the steps or the attempts which were taken by the Portuguese to colonize the Congo Kingdom, you'd realize that it is important to go beyond just identifying the methods, describing the methods. You must also assess the extent to which they were successful, or why this particular method was used, or why these particular steps were taken. If you take the last example, we are saying force or conquest was used, the Portuguese surely would win the contest because they were militarily superior. So they defeated the Bakongo and occupied their kingdom. And that was the end of it. The Portuguese succeeded. The Congo Kingdom ceased to exist as an independent kingdom. It had to dance to the tune of the Portuguese music. So that is the sad reality of what befell the Bakongo. So we are done discussing the steps which were taken to colonize the Congo Kingdom. The content is examinable, so you must internalize it, because they might ask you to, to evaluate any two or three methods which were used by the Portuguese to try to colonize the Congo Kingdom. So colonization succeeded because of those different methods which we have just, interrogated. So I want us now to move on to the next objective, the next lap of the discussions. And this is the failure of Portuguese attempts to westernize the Congo Kingdom. So the first question here is, what is westernization? What do we mean by that? Now, at the most basic level, westernization is modernity. So in other words, once the Congo Kingdom had become a Portuguese colony, and even before that, we must make a small correction. Even when the Congo Kingdom was independent, especially when it was under the custodianship of Afonso, attempts were made by the Portuguese to develop the Congo Kingdom, to modernize it, to westernize it. Because Afonso was a modernist. He wanted his kingdom to develop, and he wanted it to develop along Portuguese lines. And that is why he requested for teachers, he requested for missionaries, he requested for builders, among other things. And we know that there was not a success. I mean, to some extent, really, he was to a large extent, he was never given, everything that, he had requested to drive the modernization of his kingdom. Right. Let's forge ahead. Let's look at the factors, the reasons. Factors, reasons can be used interchangeably, which contributed to the failure of westernization or attempts by the Portuguese to modernize, to develop the Congo kingdom. There are multiple factors, but for the purposes of this discussion, I think I will restrict it to 3 to 4, factors. Let's take the first one, the slave trade. It was a factor which contributed to the failure of westernization. The Portuguese were not successful in westernizing the Congo kingdom, in other words, because of the slave trade. They were involved in it, probably knee deep. They were involved, extremely involved, to the largest extent possible. We are saying the slave trade was a key factor which stifled Alfonso I's westernization attempts. How so? We must note that the slave trade, was profitable, lucrative, an extremely profitable kind of a business. So if Portuguese experts were sent to the Congo Kingdom and they got to learn about the profitability of the slave trade business, clearly they will abandon, the official functions or duties they were given to take an active part in this profitable venture. And that is what they did. Priests, soldiers, teachers, exactly, I'm not exactly, etc., abandoned their responsibilities because they wanted to have a piece of the cake, which was the slave trade business. It was a profitable business. So it diverted their focus, it shifted attention to a profitable venture. The slave trade was more profitable, and that is why the Bakongo were enslaved in the hundreds of thousands during this particular era. So the Bakongo were treated with contempt. They were looked down upon by the Portuguese. And that is why, they had no qualms whatsoever. They had no issues selling, the Bakongo into slavery. Because in their view, that is in the view of the Portuguese, the Bakongo were lesser beings. They were inferior people. So their permanent station in life really was to provide free labor on Portuguese, farms. They were to become chattels, the personal properties of their, owners. Because there was a demand for free labor. The Portuguese had set up plantations, not only within the Congo Kingdom, but also on Sao Tome and Principe, islands which they owned, not offered, sorry. The Portuguese would work in Portuguese, the Bakongo would work on, Portuguese-owned mines without having to be paid. Because remember, if you are a slave, you are the property of the person that has bought you. They do not have any obligations, towards you except to provide you with food and clothes. Food to have the energy, to enable you to work on the mines, to work on the farms for long hours. So westernization could not succeed because people who were to drive it, teachers, missionaries, soldiers, concentrated on the slave trade because it was more profitable. So the profitability of the slave trade made Portuguese officials, government officials, to abandon their responsibilities and focus more on the slave trade because of the dividend that it could offer. Personal gain, personal wealth. That is what they were looking, for. Now, if you have any questions, you can drop a comment down below. I'll address the questions as soon as I see them. Can I now venture on to the next, reason why westernization was a failure? It was a failure because, the Portuguese. Oh, by the way, before I venture into another factor, there's something that's very important. I'm not too sure I have touched on it, but let me just put it in these blunt terms. As a result of the Portuguese involvement in the slave trade business, church and school work were neglected. So you cannot westernize the Congo Kingdom if you do not have teachers or enough teachers to teach the people literacy skills. You cannot westernize the Congo Kingdom if you do not have enough, missionaries to convert the Bakongo to Christianity. So modernity in the context of developing the Congo Kingdom was an absolute failure because of the slave trade business. Let's look at the second example. The regimento, it was a factor, a contributory factor to the failure of westernization. What was the regimento? I like to call it the Bible of modernity. It was a document basically which contained instructions on how the Congo Kingdom was to be modernized. It was to be westernized. So the guidelines were in there. Now, how then does this document, which contains guidelines on how modernity was to be achieved, contribute to the failure of westernization? The answer to this question is very straightforward. One, some of the contents of the the regiment were not accepted by Afonso. For example, as per the regimento, the Congo Kingdom was to abandon its legal system and adopt the Portuguese legal system. They would say Afonso was supposed to accept Manuel's laws, but he did not, because basically the Manuel's laws would mean if he was to adopt those laws, he will have to forgo the Congolese judicial system. He will have to lose his political power, as it were. So Afonso did not accept that. So you are not going to modernize the Congo Kingdom if you do not accept its contents, the contents of the regiment. Two, there is this argument that the regiment was extremely ambitious. In other words, there were no clear details, timelines in terms of how modernity was to be achieved. Remember, you have instructions. Probably there were just too many of those instructions which had to be followed in the document. So it was extremely ambitious, and therefore it could not yield any results. Third, still related to the regimento in terms of how it contributed to the failure of modernization. It failed because Simão da Silva, a man who understood it, died before he could implement it. So the death of Simão da Silva, therefore, handicapped the regiment in as far as its intended modernization ambitions were concerned. So in his absence, there was no one in place who could implement the regiment. He is the man who understood it. So his death meant that that was the end of the regiment. So if it was the Bible of modernization, if it was the Bible of modernity, and the person who understood it, who knew what was to be done, is no more, then modernity could not be achieved. Westernization was also a failure, we must add, because of this is our third reason. The fact that in later years, the Portuguese developed keen interest in Ndongo, what today is known as Angola. Remember, Ndongo was one of those tributary states or chiefdoms which made up the Congo Kingdom. So in later years, the Portuguese were more inclined towards establishing constant and frequent, contact with the Ndongo chiefdom. So why a shift in interest? There was this narrative, there was this pervasive kind of a story that was doing the rounds to the effect that the chiefdom of the Ndongo had unlimited mineral deposits, particularly silver. Two, it was a source of slaves. So there was a belief that Ndongo had immense mineral deposits, mineral wealth, and naturally the Portuguese would want to control, this source of mineral wealth. So this compromised their ability to, modernize the Congo Kingdom. So you would not have sufficient, experts in the Congo Kingdom carrying out, westernization, because these experts now are more interested in what Ndongo had to offer. So the Congo, if you look at it, abandoned, not the Congo, I wanted to say the Portuguese, abandoned the Congo Kingdom. They neglected it. Perhaps that would be a better term. Because if you say abandoned, basically you are saying they left, but they never left. They neglected the task at hand, that is, modernizing the Congo Kingdom, because they were more interested in Ndongo because of the mineral wealth it possessed. So they wanted to colonize Ndongo, and if Ndongo becomes their colony, they would easily, without any restrictions whatsoever, exploit its mineral wealth. Without any restrictions, they would have access to slaves. So westernization suffered because the people who were supposed to be instrumental in its implementation, those who were supposed to carry it out, had their heads turned, in a manner of speaking. There was something that interested them more than that which they were supposed to focus on. And that was the Ndongo chiefdom, because of the slaves, it offered, and also because of the minerals it was assumed to have. Silver was important at the time because it was used in the production of coins, silver coins. So the Portuguese wanted to control the source of the silver. That was their motivation. Because if they controlled it, they stood a better chance of generating wealth from the production and even the sale of silver to their European competitors. I hope that is clear enough. The final point or factor which could have contributed to the failure of westernization is the issue of communication. That the communication lines between Afonso and King John III of Portugal were not very clear. They were broken most of the times. So there was a communication breakdown between the Congo Kingdom and Portugal. So whenever Afonso was complaining about Portuguese activities in his kingdom, for instance, their involvement in the slave trade, he would do so through letters. He wrote letters to King John III. And evidence shows that in most instances, in the majority of instances, these letters never reached John III, because the messengers were the Portuguese. And when the letters got to Sao Tome, a Portuguese island, owned island, I must say, the Portuguese settlers, they would not pass them on because the letters painted them in a bad light. They were accused of ill-treating the Bakongo. They were accused of neglecting their official duties or functions. So if such letters were to find their way to King Manuel, probably, there would be consequences. That's one. Two, even in situations or instances where John III received these letters, he showed a lot of disinterest. He was indifferent to the contents of the letter, to Afonso's complaints. He rarely acted because he was not interested in the Congo Kingdom, we are told at the time. When he responded, we are told the responses were not useful. They were not helpful. They were useless, in other words, because they did not address the contents of the letter. They did not provide solutions to the problems that Alphonse was actually grappling with or complaining about. Because King John III was not interested in the Congo Kingdom. His interest was in Ndongo because of the wealth that particular chiefdom offered. So there you are, the four factors which were a stumbling block towards the realization of westernization that Alfonso was so much yearning for or desperate for. So in closing, we are saying westernization failed because of the regimental, westernization failed because of the slave trade, westernization failed because the Portuguese were more interested in colonizing Dongo, and fourth, westernization failed because of communication breakdown between the Congo Kingdom and Portugal. So there you have it, 4 reasons. There are many others out there. If you're not comfortable with these other factors, do a bit of, should I call it a research? No. Go look for information. Go look for the other factors. So here are the 4 examples that I wanted us to talk about. For revision purposes, you should expect questions which ask you to state the factors which contributed to the failure of westernization, any 4 factors. They might ask you to explain any 2 factors which contributed to the failure of westernization for 6 marks. That would be a B part question. They might even ask you to describe any 2 factors. That would be an A part question, where you do not have to, evaluate the extent to which they contributed to the failure of westernization. So basically, you are saying the slave trade contributed to the failure of westernization, as the Portuguese were, interested in taking part in selling, our slaves to plantation owners. That becomes a description. You don't have to explain, why they sold the Bakongo into slavery and what benefits they got out of it, or even how the slave trade now affected, the indigenous populations. That is the Bakongo. So you are describing. You are more into the what and the who. Third, they may ask you to evaluate the contribution of any three factors to the failure of westernization. That is a C-part question for 10 marks. And remember, when you are dealing with a C-part question, the requirement is you take a stand and then you evaluate 3 factors. When you are not given the factors, you discuss any 3 factors of your choice. Sometimes they'll provide you with any 3 factors. And the requirement is you use only those 3 factors to answer the question. Sometimes they'll give you 1 factor. So to satisfy the requirements of a C-part question, you must explain first the factor that you have been given, that is in the question. When you are done, you evaluate any other 2 factors and provide a conclusion at the end. And I want to point this out. B and C part questions are more or less the same. You are required to identify the factor. What happened? How did it happen? Who was involved? You are describing. And what, not why, and why. When now you evaluate, you provide an explanation. You are reasoning with the fact or the facts. And if it's a C part question at the end, we are saying you must provide a conclusion where you make an assessment to say which one of these factors contributed the most. Or you could say these factors equally contributed, and then you briefly show how they could have contributed to the failure of westernization, because that is what we are talking about. So I'm going to stop here. I hope I've shared some useful information. Clearly, there are going to be gaps in what I've just put before you. The responsibility is on you to go out there and fill in the gaps. I hope you find this useful as you revise for your school-based assessment as well as the national terminal assessment. Good luck and bye-bye.